The security camera captures everything in grainy detail. A man walks into a bank at 2:30 in the afternoon. He's short, balding, wearing a t-shirt with the word "Guess" printed across the chest. He waits in line like any other customer. When he reaches the counter, he slides a white envelope to the teller and begins sucking on a lollipop he took from the candy bowl by the entrance. Then he lifts his shirt. Beneath it, locked around his neck like a medieval torture device, sits a metal collar connected to 2 pipe bombs. The timer is already counting down. He walks out of the bank swinging a cane and a bag of money, witnesses later say, like Charlie Chaplin. 48 minutes later, he's handcuffed on the pavement in a parking lot, begging police to remove the device. They don't. At 3:18 p.m., the bomb detonates, blasting a fist-sized hole through his chest. They told him it was fake. Someone is always lying in Erie, Pennsylvania. August 28, 2003. The lunch rush at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria on Peach Street was winding down when the phone rang at 1:30 in the afternoon. Tony DiTomo, the owner, picked up. A voice on the other end ordered 2 large sausage and pepperoni pizzas. DiTomo couldn't understand the address through the static and garbled speech, so he passed the phone to one of his delivery drivers. Brian Douglas Wells took the receiver and wrote down the location, 8631 Peach Street. He hung up, grabbed the pizzas from the warming oven, and headed out to his Geo Metro. It was the end of his shift. He could have refused the delivery. He didn't. Brian Wells was 46 years old. He stood 5 feet 3 inches tall, balding on top, soft around the middle. He'd been delivering pizzas for Mamma Mia's for 10 years. In all that time, he'd only called in late once, when one of his 3 cats died. His landlady, Linda Payne, described him as shy to the point of invisibility. He ate breakfast at McDonald's every morning, bought a newspaper, came home to his small apartment, and waited for his shift to start. He'd removed the hubcaps from his Geo Metro because they were too shiny, too attention-grabbing. Neighbors said he was the perfect tenant. Quiet, helpful, simple. The word they used most often was childlike. He lived alone. No wife, no girlfriend, no close friends that anyone knew about. Just the 3 cats and the pizza deliveries and the routine that structured his days. He was the kind of person you could know for years without really knowing at all. The kind of person who becomes a ghost in his own life long before he dies. Erie, Pennsylvania in 2003 was a city slowly collapsing in on itself. The manufacturing jobs that built the place had been hemorrhaging for decades. The population was shrinking. Rust crept across abandoned factories along the lakeshore. It was the kind of place people left, not the kind they moved to. Less than 2 years had passed since September 11th. The country was still raw, still looking over its shoulder. When strange things happened, terrorism was always the first thought. 8631 Peach Street wasn't a house. The address led to a dirt road that wound through a wooded area south of the city. At the end of that road sat a transmission tower for WSEE-TV, rising up through the trees like a steel skeleton. No houses, no witnesses, just the tower and the woods and the dirt road in. Wells would have arrived around 2 p.m. His Geo Metro left tire tracks in the dirt. His shoes left footprints in the clearing. What happened in those woods has never been fully reconstructed. The evidence tells fragments of a story. There were other footprints, other tire tracks. Multiple people were present. A struggle took place. Wells tried to run. Someone fired a gun. The report echoed through the trees. Witnesses living a half-mile away heard the shot. Wells stopped running. Hands grabbed him. The collar was already assembled, waiting. It locked around his neck with 4 keyholes positioned under his chin and a 3-digit combination lock on the back. The device clicked shut. It weighed roughly 10 pounds, metal cold against skin. They handed him a cane. It wasn't a cane. Inside the wooden shaft, they'd mounted a homemade shotgun, the barrel disguised, the trigger accessible. They handed him 9 pages of handwritten instructions addressed to bomb hostage. They told him what to do. They told him the bomb was real. They told him if he followed the instructions exactly, he might live. They warned him not to call the police. They said they'd be watching. Then they sent him back to his car with 2 pizzas he'd never deliver and a bomb locked around his throat. The PNC Bank at Summit Town Center sat 2 miles north of the transmission tower, back up Peach Street toward the city. Wells arrived at 2:28 p.m. He parked his Geo Metro in the lot. The cane-shaped shotgun rested against his leg, the bomb collar pressed against his collarbone. The timer had already started. He walked through the front door. Security cameras tracked his movement. He didn't rush, didn't look panicked. He waited in line behind other customers like he had all the time in the world. When someone in front of him finished their transaction, Wells stepped forward. He was sucking on a dum-dum lollipop, cherry-flavored, the stick protruding from his lips. He slid a white envelope across the counter to the teller. Inside, a note typed in all capitals, "Gather employees with access codes to vault and work fast to fill bag with $250,000. You only have 15 minutes. Then Wells lifted his shirt. The bomb sat heavy and obvious against his torso. The teller stared. The note explained the device was real. Any attempt to flee would result in detonation. Any attempt to trigger a silent alarm would result in detonation. The teller was to fill a bag with exactly $250,000 and hand it over. One teller whispered to a customer near the door. The customer nodded. A small group of people began walking toward the exit. Wells watched them go. He didn't stop them, didn't threaten them with the cane. One of the tellers coded Audrey into the system, the bank's internal robbery alert. Wells either didn't notice or didn't care. Another teller explained they couldn't access the main vault. It was time-locked. The best they could do was the cash drawer. Wells nodded, still calm, still sucking the lollipop. The teller gathered bills from multiple drawers, 1s, 5s, 10s, 20s. She placed stacks into a canvas bag. It came to $8,702, a fraction of what the note demanded. Wells took the bag. He left his driver's license on the counter, as the instructions required. He left a sealed note addressed to police. Then he walked out the same door he'd entered. John Seekle, a witness waiting in line, watched him leave. Later, Seekle told investigators Wells seemed neither frightened nor aggressive. The word he used was calm, impossibly calm for a man wearing a bomb. Wells walked past the witnesses who'd fled. They stood in the parking lot. Seekle said Wells didn't bat an eye, just kept walking, swinging the cane and the money bag in a loose, almost jaunty rhythm. A woman with a cell phone dialed 911 at 2:38 p.m. 10 minutes had passed since Wells entered the bank. He climbed into his Geo Metro. The instructions told him where to go next. Drive north on Peach Street. Stop at the McDonald's on the corner. Get out of the car. Walk to the small sign reading, "Drive-through open 24 hours" in the flower bed. Under that sign, beneath a rock, another note waited. Wells drove. He parked. He found the rock and peeled the note from its underside. 2 more pages of instructions. More locations. More tasks. Keys hidden across the city. Combinations to be discovered. The timer kept running. State police spotted the Geo Metro at 2:52 p.m., driving north on Peach Street near the Eyeglass World Plaza. They pulled him over. Wells got out of the car slowly, hands visible. He told them immediately. A bomb, around his neck. Put there by 3 black men who'd forced him to rob the bank. He had to complete a scavenger hunt or it would detonate. He showed them the collar, the pipe bombs, the timer ticking down. The officers stepped back. They drew their weapons. One officer called for backup. Another radioed for the bomb squad. They handcuffed Wells and sat him on the ground in the parking lot. Then they moved away. Wells sat on the hot asphalt. The afternoon sun beat down. Traffic on Peach Street slowed as drivers craned their necks to see. The bomb squad received the call at 3:04 p.m. Traffic congestion across Erie delayed their response. The nearest unit was stuck in gridlock on Interstate 79. Wells started shouting. His voice carried across the parking lot. "Why isn't anybody trying to get this thing off me? I don't have a lot of time. It's going to go off. I'm not lying." He asked if someone had called his boss. He wanted Tony DiTomo to know he wasn't just abandoning the Geo Metro full of pizza warming equipment. He wanted someone to take care of his cats. At 3:16 p.m., the device began emitting a rapid beeping sound, high-pitched and insistent. Wells's voice changed. The calm evaporated. He started screaming. The officers backed further away. The beeping accelerated. At exactly 3:18 p.m., the collar bomb detonated. The explosion was sharp and contained. Not a massive fireball, just a focused blast that punched through Wells's sternum and obliterated everything behind it. His body snapped backward and hit the pavement. Blood spread in a dark pool. Medics rushed forward. There was nothing to do. Brian Wells died on the ground in a parking lot in Erie, Pennsylvania, with his hands cuffed behind his back and a bomb collar still locked around what remained of his neck. 2 minutes later, at 3:20 p.m., the bomb squad arrived. The 9 pages of instructions sat in Wells's Geo Metro, waiting for investigators. They were handwritten in block letters, some sections typed and pasted, illustrated with crude diagrams. The paper had been folded and refolded multiple times. The first page was addressed simply, "Bomb hostage." The instructions were precise. After robbing the bank, Wells was to drive to the McDonald's and retrieve the first clue. From there, the hunt wound through Erie in an elaborate pattern. Each location contained a key or a code. The keys would supposedly unlock the 4 keyholes on the collar. The codes would unlock the combination lock on the back. Completing all tasks within the allotted time would supposedly disarm the bomb. The instructions included warnings in capital letters. "Act now, think later, or you will die." Another page reminded Wells he was under constant surveillance. Any attempt to contact police would trigger immediate detonation. "We are watching. We have cell phone detonators. Do not deviate from instructions." Hours after Wells died, police attempted to complete the scavenger hunt themselves. They drove to each location, following the sequence. The second clue led to a wooded area near a Pennsylvania State Police barracks. The third sent them to a location near Interstate 90. The fourth took them back toward the television tower. Each clue was found exactly where the instructions indicated. Someone had planted them carefully, probably days in advance. But the timeline didn't work. Even driving at maximum speed, even knowing exactly where to go without studying the clues, investigators couldn't complete the route in the time allotted. The bomb would have detonated long before Wells reached the final location. The scavenger hunt was designed to fail. Whoever created it knew Wells would die regardless of how perfectly he followed instructions. The entire elaborate scheme was theater, a show of false hope. More disturbing, one of the clue locations came up empty when police checked it hours after the robbery. The conspirators had apparently returned and removed evidence once police interfered. They'd been watching. The instructions weren't bluffing. The use of "we" and "us" throughout the pages indicated multiple people involved. A team, a conspiracy. The collar bomb itself was a masterwork of engineering. The hinged collar functioned like an oversized handcuff, locking around the circumference of the neck. 4 keyholes positioned under the chin required 4 specific keys. The 3-digit combination lock on the rear required the correct sequence. The rectangular housing contained 2 6-inch pipe bombs loaded with double-base smokeless powder and packed with shrapnel. 2 Sunbeam kitchen timers hung from the device, one dangling against Wells's chest. But much of the device was pure deception. Loose wires led nowhere. A toy cell phone was glued to the housing, non-functional but threatening. Warning stickers screamed danger in red letters. The bomb included anti-tamper mechanisms. Any attempt to cut the collar would trigger detonation. Any attempt to remove it without the proper keys and combination would trigger detonation. After the explosion, investigators had to sever Wells's head from his body. The collar remained intact, locked tight. They couldn't examine the device without separating it from what was left of Wells's neck. The bomb was transported to a secure facility for disassembly. Forensic analysis revealed professional-grade construction. Whoever built it had access to machine shops, welding equipment, and extensive knowledge of electronics and explosives. The craftsmanship was excellent. The cruelty was extraordinary. Marjorie Deal Armstrong was 53 years old in 2003. In her high school yearbook, she'd been voted most likely to succeed. Valedictorian, National Merit Scholar. She'd earned a master's degree from Gannon University in Erie, studying literature and education. Her IQ tested in the genius range. Teachers remembered her as brilliant, driven, destined for achievement. Something broke in her 20s. The first signs were mood swings, periods of manic energy where she'd talk for hours without pause, thoughts racing faster than words could follow. Then crashes into depression so severe she'd lock herself in her apartment for weeks. Doctors diagnosed bipolar disorder, then paranoid personality disorder, then borderline personality disorder. The medications never worked quite right. She'd take them for a while, then stop, convinced the doctors were poisoning her. Her behavior grew erratic. She'd show up at friends' houses at 3 a.m. demanding to talk. She'd accuse neighbors of spying on her, following her, plotting against her. She stopped bathing regularly. Her apartments filled with garbage, old newspapers, rotting food. She became a hoarder, unable to throw anything away, convinced every scrap of paper might be important someday. Men kept dying around her. Her first husband hung himself in their basement in 1975. Suicide, according to the official ruling. Her second husband, Robert Trask, died after hitting his head on a coffee table in their home in 1979. Accidental death, the coroner said, but the pattern was starting to form. In 1984, she shot her boyfriend Robert Thomas 6 times as he lay on the couch in her apartment. She called police herself. When they arrived, Thomas was dead on the floor, 6 bullet wounds in his chest and abdomen. Diehl Armstrong claimed self-defense. Thomas had been beating her for months, she said. That day, he'd attacked her again. She'd grabbed the gun, pulled the trigger, kept pulling. The jury acquitted her. Self-defense, justifiable homicide. She walked free. Other boyfriends followed. They moved into her increasingly squalid apartments, tolerated her mood swings and paranoia, then vanished under suspicious circumstances. One died in a motorcycle accident. Another suffered a heart attack. Another overdosed. The police investigated some of the deaths. They never found enough evidence to charge her. But people in Erie started talking. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong had a reputation. Dating her was dangerous. Brad Falk, the district attorney for Erie County, had gone to high school with Marjorie. He remembered her as the smartest person in school. By 2003, he'd prosecuted her twice for lesser crimes: theft, fraud. Each time, she'd represented herself in court, convinced she could outwit the prosecution. Falk described her as someone who believed she was smarter than everyone else in the room. One of those folks that thinks she's slicker and brighter than everybody else. She believes she will win or she'll prevail on anything that she does. It's the way she's been for 40 years. She moved from apartment to apartment as landlords evicted her. Each residence became uninhabitable within months. Garbage piled ceiling high. Dog feces covered the floors. Cats roamed free, urinating on the mountains of newspapers and pizza boxes. The smell drove neighbors to complain. Eventually, Diehl Armstrong moved in with her latest boyfriend, James Roden, in 2003. He was 45 years old, worked odd jobs, tolerated her chaos. They'd been together for 10 years. He probably thought he was safe. On August 13, 2003, Marjorie shot James Roden with a 12-gauge shotgun while he slept in their bedroom. The blast killed him instantly. She called William Rothstein, an old friend and former fiancé. She told him what she'd done. She needed help. Rothstein drove to her house. Together, they wrapped Roden's body in tarps and loaded it into Rothstein's car. Rothstein drove the body to his own house on Peach Street, hauled it to his garage, and stuffed it into a chest freezer. Diehl Armstrong paid him $2,000 for the assistance. 2 weeks later, Brian Wells died with a bomb around his neck. For a while, it seemed like 2 separate crimes: a bizarre bank robbery, an unrelated domestic murder. Then Marjorie made a mistake. William Rothstein called 911 on September 20, 2003, 23 days after Wells died. The dispatcher answered. Rothstein's voice was calm, almost clinical. At 8645 Peach Street, in the garage, there is a frozen body. It's in the freezer. Police arrived within minutes. Rothstein met them at the door. He was impossible to miss. 6 feet 6 inches tall, gaunt, wearing denim overalls and a vest covered with pockets stuffed full of pens and small notebooks. He looked like a mad inventor from a children's book. He led officers to the garage and pointed at a large chest freezer in the corner. Inside, wrapped in black tarps and frozen solid, they found James Roden's body. Rothstein explained calmly. He was storing the body as a favor for a friend. The friend was Marjorie Diehl Armstrong. She'd called him on August 13th in a panic. She'd shot her boyfriend. She needed help disposing of the body. Rothstein agreed. He'd known Marjorie for decades. They'd been engaged twice years ago, back when she was still brilliant and only mildly unstable. He picked up the body, stored it in his freezer, cleaned the crime scene at her house. Marjorie paid him $2,000 in cash. Why was he calling police now, 3 weeks later? Rothstein explained. Marjorie had returned recently with a new plan. The body was too large for the freezer. She wanted to dismember it. She'd brought an industrial ice grinder to his house. She planned to grind James Roden into manageable pieces, bag them, dispose of them. Rothstein said that's where he drew the line. Murder was one thing. Body disposal, fine. But grinding up a corpse felt wrong. He decided to turn himself in. The police arrested Rothstein immediately. They arrested Diehl Armstrong the same day. The district attorney charged her with murder. At the station, she denied everything. Then she admitted shooting Roden, but claimed self-defense again. Then she changed her story and said Rothstein had done it. Then she offered a plea deal. Guilty but mentally ill to third-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. 7 to 20 years. The judge accepted. Marjorie went to Muncie Correctional Institution. During processing, police found Rothstein's suicide note in a desk drawer at his house. The note was 3 pages long, neatly typed, dated the day before he called 911. It detailed his guilt over hiding Roden's body. It explained his intention to kill himself rather than face prison. It was theatrical and self-pitying. The final paragraph read, "This has nothing to do with the Wells case." Investigators stopped reading and started asking questions. Nobody had mentioned Brian Wells. Nobody had connected Rothstein to the pizza bomber incident. The suicide note was the first link. Why would Rothstein specifically deny involvement in a crime nobody had accused him of committing? They started looking at maps. Rothstein's house on Peach Street sat a 5-minute walk from the television transmission tower at 8631 Peach Street. The payphone where the pizza order originated was at a Shell station less than half a mile from Rothstein's driveway. Lorraine Blodgett, the manager of the convenience store at the Shell station, told investigators that Rothstein was a regular customer. He'd come in several times a week to buy newspapers and cookies. He'd sit in his car in the parking lot, eating and reading. He'd use the payphone frequently. Police obtained a warrant and searched Rothstein's property. The house was a monument to hoarding. Every room was packed floor to ceiling with machinery, tools, electronics, newspapers, books, mechanical parts. Narrow pathways wound through the junk. The garage contained welding equipment, drill presses, lathes, grinding wheels, everything necessary to construct a sophisticated explosive device. Investigators seized power tools, metal scraps, timer fragments. They found sketches of mechanical devices in Rothstein's notebooks. They found photographs of bomb collars. They found evidence of metalwork matching the bomb that killed Brian Wells. On September 13, 2003, 16 days after Wells died and 7 days before he called police about Roden's body, Rothstein had driven to a landfill outside Erie. Security cameras captured his truck entering the facility. He unloaded material from his truck bed. Staff estimated he dumped approximately 1,040 pounds of debris. Investigators combed through the landfill but never recovered the material. Whatever Rothstein disposed of was buried under tons of garbage by the time they looked. William Rothstein spoke multiple languages fluently: German, French, Russian. He'd worked as a substitute teacher at high schools around Erie, teaching shop class and basic engineering. Students remembered him as eccentric but brilliant, capable of building almost anything. He'd never married. No criminal record beyond a minor incident in 1977 where he'd provided a handgun to a friend who later used it to murder someone. Rothstein testified against the friend in exchange for immunity. The pattern was established early. In Erie, Rothstein belonged to a loose group of friends who called themselves the fractured intellectuals. People with high IQs and advanced degrees who'd never managed to function in normal society. Brilliant misfits, hoarders, conspiracy theorists. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was part of that circle. So was Kenneth Barnes. Rothstein was admitted to Mill Creek Community Hospital on July 23, 2004, suffering from advanced non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The cancer had metastasized throughout his body. He died on July 30, 2004, at the age of 60. He was never indicted, never charged. He died with all the secrets. Kenneth Eugene Barnes was 53 years old in 2003. He'd worked as a television repairman for decades, building a solid reputation in Erie for fixing complex electronic problems. Somewhere in the 1990s, he transitioned into selling crack cocaine. The money was better. The hours were flexible. He dealt mostly to sex workers in the area, supplying drugs in exchange for cash or services. He was known as reliable, nonviolent, a businessman who happened to sell illegal substances. Barnes and Marjorie Deal Armstrong were fishing buddies. They'd known each other for years. Barnes would pick up Marjorie in his truck, drive to remote lakes around Erie, spend afternoons casting lines and talking. What they talked about, nobody knows. But in late 2002 or early 2003, those conversations turned to murder. Marjorie's father, Harold Deal, was 84 years old. He'd made his money in oil and gas, building a small fortune through careful investments. His estate was valued at approximately $1.8 million. Marjorie believed she was entitled to that money. Harold disagreed. He'd cut off financial support for his daughter decades earlier, disgusted by her criminal behavior and inability to hold steady employment. He'd watched her kill 2 men and walk free. He'd watched her descend into hoarding and madness. He wanted nothing to do with her. Marjorie proposed a solution to Barnes. Kill Harold Deal. Make it look like an accident. She'd inherit the money, split it with Barnes. The payment would be $250,000 for the hit. Barnes agreed, but neither of them had $250,000 to fund the operation until after Harold was dead and the inheritance paid out. They needed capital. They needed a bank robbery. Barnes already knew Brian Wells. Not well, but casually. They moved in overlapping social circles in Erie's underclass. Barnes dealt drugs to Jessica Hoopsick, a 27-year-old sex worker who lived in the area. Hoopsick knew Wells. She'd slept with him multiple times, sometimes at Barnes's house, sometimes in Wells's apartment. Wells was lonely. Hoopsick needed money. The arrangement suited both of them. Hoopsick later claimed that Barnes approached her in July 2003 with a proposal. He needed a gopher. Someone scared enough to follow orders, simple enough not to ask too many questions. Someone who could be manipulated. Hoopsick thought of Wells immediately. She described him to Barnes as a pushover. Barnes offered her drugs and cash in exchange for Wells's name, his work schedule, his delivery routes. Hoopsick agreed. She gave up Brian Wells for a few $100s and some crack cocaine. The planning phase stretched over weeks. Marjorie, Barnes, Rothstein, and possibly others met at various locations around Erie. They worked out the details, the bomb collar, the cane shotgun, the scavenger hunt, the pizza delivery as bait. At some point, they needed a 4th person. That's where Floyd Stockton entered the conspiracy. Floyd Stockton was 53 years old, a convicted rapist who'd assaulted a disabled teenager years earlier. He'd been living as a fugitive, hiding from parole violations. Rothstein let him stay in his house on Peach Street, one hoarder sheltering another. Stockton had no money, no prospects, nowhere else to go. When the conspirators needed extra muscle for the operation, Stockton agreed to help. The FBI built a profile of the conspirators based on behavioral analysis. The profile described someone who hoarded compulsively, someone comfortable with machine tools and power equipment, someone who took pride in creating devices with dual purposes, a collar that was also a bomb, a cane that was also a shotgun. The profile described someone with a violent criminal history and a superiority complex, someone who believed they were smarter than law enforcement, smarter than everyone. The profile fit Marjorie perfectly. It fit Rothstein perfectly. Together, they were the collar bomb. Separately, they were incomplete. According to witness statements gathered later, Wells talked about a bank robbery plan roughly a month before August 28, 2003. He mentioned it to acquaintances. He never specified details, just vague references to making money, pulling off something big. Some people heard him, some dismissed it as drunk talk. Wells drank heavily on weekends, frequenting bars near his apartment. When he drank, he became talkative, boastful in ways he never was sober. Maybe he was testing the plan. Maybe he was bragging about something he thought would make him less invisible. One witness told the FBI that Wells visited Rothstein's house in late August, days before the robbery. Another witness placed Wells's Geo Metro in Rothstein's driveway on August 27, 2003, the day before he died. Investigators believed Wells participated in at least one rehearsal of the bank robbery. They believed he knew the plan. They believed he agreed to wear the collar bomb because someone told him it was fake. The question that haunts the case: did Brian Wells know he was going to die? Harold Deal learned about his daughter's arrest in September 2003 from a reporter. He was 84 years old, living alone in his house in Erie. His wife had died years earlier. He had one daughter. When the reporter told him Marjorie had been charged with murder and potentially with planning the collar bomb bank robbery, Harold wasn't surprised. "I believe it," he said. "Her mind has not been stable." He explained that he'd cut Marjorie off financially in the 1980s. She'd killed Robert Thomas and walked free. She'd asked Harold for money repeatedly: legal fees, rent, living expenses. Harold had paid at first, and eventually he refused. Marjorie began calling him at all hours, screaming about the money she deserved, the inheritance that was rightfully hers. Harold changed his phone number. Marjorie showed up at his house. Harold threatened to call police. She stopped visiting, but she never stopped believing the money was hers. Harold's estate was substantial, built through careful investments in Pennsylvania's oil and gas industry during the boom years. At its peak, the estate was valued at $1.8 million. But Harold was generous with friends and charitable causes. Over the years, he gave away significant portions of his wealth to organizations he believed in. By 2003, the estate had diminished to approximately $120,000. In his will, Harold left his daughter Marjorie exactly $2,000. Not enough to matter. Not nothing. A statement. The will included provisions requiring all outstanding medical bills and debts to be paid before any inheritance could be distributed. Harold's medical care in his final years was expensive. Long-term nursing, hospital stays. When Harold died in January 2014 at the age of 95, the estate's debts exceeded its assets. Marjorie received nothing. $0. 0 cents. She'd planned a bank robbery and a murder for hire to inherit money that no longer existed. The entire scheme was based on false assumptions. Harold wasn't hoarding a fortune. He'd already given it away. The mechanics of the plot were absurd from the start. Rob a bank of $250,000. Use that money to pay Kenneth Barnes to murder Harold Deal. Inherit $1.8 million. Split the inheritance with Barnes. Everyone walks away rich. Except banks don't keep $250,000 in teller drawers. Inheritances take months or years to settle through probate. Murder investigations delay estates indefinitely. None of the plan made sense logically. But Marjorie believed in her own brilliance. She believed she could outsmart the system, the police, the laws of probability. She'd gotten away with killing Robert Thomas. She'd gotten away with suspicious deaths of other boyfriends. Why not one more? Kenneth Barnes later testified that Marjorie was the mastermind. She designed the plan, recruited the team, micromanaged every detail. She provided the kitchen timers used in the bomb. She selected Brian Wells as the target after Hoopsick gave her his name. She insisted the collar bomb had to be real, not fake. Barnes claimed he argued against using a real bomb. Wells could have worn a convincing fake device and gotten the same result. Marjorie refused. The bomb had to work. Wells had to die. He was a witness who could identify them all. Better to eliminate him during the crime than risk him talking later. Rothstein built the device according to Marjorie's specifications: the collar, the pipe bombs, the timers. He created a bomb that would detonate on schedule regardless of whether Wells completed the scavenger hunt. The hunt was theater, a distraction, a false hope that would keep Wells compliant long enough to rob the bank and die before he could implicate anyone. The plot required Wells to believe the bomb was fake. That's why they told him it was a prop, a convincing fake designed to scare bank tellers and provide an alibi if he got caught. He could claim he was forced, coerced, a victim. The bomb around his neck would prove it, except the bomb was real, and it was always going to detonate. Wells was going to die. The FBI investigation lasted 4 years. Agents conducted more than 1,000 interviews. They traveled across the country chasing leads. They built timelines, analyzed evidence, constructed profile after profile. In July 2007, U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan announced the conclusion. Marjorie Deal Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes were indicted on charges of armed bank robbery, conspiracy, and use of a destructive device in a crime of violence. William Rothstein and Brian Wells were named as unindicted co-conspirators. The conclusion was clear. Brian Wells knew about the bank robbery plan. He agreed to participate. He thought the bomb was fake. He was betrayed and murdered by his co-conspirators. The evidence supporting Wells's involvement seemed substantial. Two witnesses told the FBI that Wells had discussed robbing a bank approximately 1 month before August 28, 2003. He'd talked about it casually, in vague terms, but the timeline matched. A witness placed Wells at Rothstein's house on August 27, 2003, the day before the robbery. Investigators believed this was a rehearsal. Wells needed to see the bomb collar, try on the device, practice the timing. He needed to believe it looked convincing. Rothstein and Marjorie needed Wells to trust them. Wells's behavior during the robbery troubled investigators. His calmness, the lollipop, the way he walked out of the bank swinging the money bag like a vaudeville performer. He let customers leave. He didn't threaten anyone. He left his driver's license with the teller, along with a note for police. If Wells truly believed a bomb might detonate at any moment, wouldn't he have been more frantic, more desperate? Instead, witness after witness described him as oddly serene. District Attorney Buchanan explained the theory. Wells was promised a cut of the money, maybe $10,000, maybe $20,000, enough to change his life. He agreed to wear what he believed was a theatrical prop. The conspirators told him the bomb looked real, but was completely inert. No explosives, no danger, just metal and wires and impressive-looking timers. If police caught him, which they probably would, the fake bomb would provide perfect cover. He could claim coercion. He could play the victim. The courts would have sympathy. He might get probation, maybe a short sentence, worth the risk for that much money. The betrayal came at the television tower. According to Barnes's testimony, Wells arrived with the pizzas expecting to pick up the fake collar device. Instead, he found the real one. When he realized the truth, when he tried to run, someone fired a gun. The shots stopped him. They locked the collar around his neck at gunpoint. They handed him the cane shotgun and the instructions and sent him to rob the bank. Barnes claimed Wells only understood the danger when the collar clicked shut. By then, it was too late. But the evidence against Wells's involvement was equally compelling. His family insisted he'd been coerced from the beginning. Jean Hyde, his sister, told reporters her brother had no criminal history, no history of violence, no debts that would motivate robbery. He lived modestly, worked steadily, caused no trouble. The idea that he'd suddenly agree to rob a bank strained credibility. His landlady, Linda Payne, said Wells would never hurt anyone, never risk danger, never participate in anything illegal. He was too timid, too risk-averse. Wells's actions during the robbery cut both ways. He let people leave the bank. Why would a co-conspirator do that? More witnesses meant more potential identifications. A real criminal would have controlled the situation, minimized exposure. Wells left his driver's license on the counter. What kind of criminal voluntarily gives police their identification? The note he left for police included details about his coercion that led investigators directly to him. If Wells was genuinely complicit, these actions made no sense, and his final 30 minutes told a different story. The panic, the pleading. Why isn't anybody trying to get this thing off me? That wasn't the voice of someone who'd known the plan. That was terror. Pure, unfiltered realization that death was approaching and no one was helping. If Wells had been a co-conspirator who got double-crossed, wouldn't he have told police? Wouldn't he have named his betrayers, tried to bargain for help? Instead, he stuck to the story about 3 black men, the lie the conspirators had instructed him to tell. Either he believed the lie himself, or he was too frightened to deviate from the script even as the bomb ticked down. Jessica Hoopsick's confession in 2018, 15 years after Wells died, complicated everything further. In the Netflix documentary Evil Genius, Hoopsick admitted she'd set Wells up. Kenneth Barnes had approached her looking for a gopher who could be manipulated into robbing a bank. Hoopsick immediately thought of Wells. She gave Barnes all the details. Wells's name, his work schedule, his delivery routes for Mamma Mia's pizzeria. She was paid with drugs and cash. According to Hoopsick, Brian Wells had no advance knowledge of the robbery. He thought he was delivering pizzas. He was ambushed at the television tower, forced into the collar, and sent to his death. ATF agent Jason Wick, who worked the investigation, responded carefully to Hoopsick's claims. He acknowledged that authorities had always suspected Hoopsick knew more than she revealed during initial questioning. She'd been uncooperative in 2003, evasive, hostile. The FBI believed she was protecting someone, but Wick also expressed doubt about her credibility 15 years later. Hoopsick was a drug addict with a criminal record. Her memory might be unreliable. Her motivations might include seeking attention or payment from the documentary. The confession felt true, but couldn't be verified. The truth probably lives somewhere in the ambiguous middle. Wells might have known something was planned without understanding the details. Maybe he knew about a robbery scheme, but genuinely believed the bomb was fake. Maybe he agreed to participate in a minor way, thinking he'd just deliver pizzas and collect easy money, not realizing he'd become the central player. Maybe the conspirators lied to him incrementally, revealing the truth in stages until he was too committed to back out. Or maybe Brian Wells was completely innocent. A pizza delivery man who went to the wrong address at the wrong time and died for it. A man who spent 46 years invisible, only to become famous for the worst possible reason. That possibility haunts the case more than any other. The idea that Wells's calmness at the bank wasn't complicity, but shock. Complete psychological dissociation. A mind refusing to process the impossible reality of a bomb locked around its neck. The jury in Marjorie Diehl Armstrong's trial heard all the evidence. They convicted her on all counts. But the verdict specifically addressed the bank robbery and conspiracy charges. Wells's involvement was never adjudicated. He was never charged, never tried, never given the opportunity to defend himself. The FBI named him an unindicted co-conspirator based on witness testimony that came from the same people who built the bomb that killed him. Kenneth Barnes testified against Wells to reduce his own sentence. Marjorie blamed Wells to deflect from her own guilt. Both had reasons to lie. Wells's family never accepted the FBI's conclusion. On the day District Attorney Buchanan announced the indictments and named Wells as a conspirator, his sister Jean stood in the courtroom and screamed, "Liar!" repeatedly until security removed her. She told reporters afterward, "My brother was 100% innocent. These people murdered him, and now they're trying to murder his reputation." That's the final cruelty. Brian Wells's guilt or innocence might matter less than the fact that he's dead and his killers got to write the narrative. The only person who truly knows what Wells believed and understood died in a parking lot with a bomb around his neck. William Rothstein's house on Peach Street became a crime scene after his death. Investigators spent weeks cataloging the contents. Every room was a labyrinth of junk, old televisions stacked to the ceiling, engine parts piled in corners, newspapers dating back decades, books in multiple languages covering every available surface. The narrow pathways between the piles could barely accommodate a human body moving sideways. The garage was different. Rothstein had kept the garage clean, organized, functional. Welding equipment lined one wall. Drill presses, lathes, grinding wheels occupied strategic positions. Tool chests contained precise instruments for metalwork, electronics repair, fine mechanical assembly. This wasn't a hoarder's chaos. This was a workshop maintained by someone who took pride in craftsmanship. Investigators found metal fragments matching the collar bomb's composition. They found electronics components matching the timers. They found sketches in Rothstein's notebooks depicting mechanical devices with hinged collars, keyhole mechanisms, combination locks. The drawings were detailed, professional-grade engineering schematics. Some sketches included annotations in multiple languages, German technical terms mixed with English instructions, mixed with French component names. The collar bomb was a masterpiece of engineering in its way. The hinged collar functioned like an oversized handcuff, closing around Wells's neck with perfect tension. Too tight, and Wells would have been unable to breathe or swallow. Too loose, and he might have slipped free. Rothstein calculated the exact dimensions required. The 4 keyholes positioned under the chin prevented Wells from seeing them directly. He'd have needed mirrors to examine them properly. The 3-digit combination lock on the back of the collar was equally inaccessible. Wells couldn't reach it with his hands. He'd have needed assistance to unlock it, even if he'd known the combination. The two 6-inch pipe bombs were loaded with double-base smokeless powder and packed with shrapnel, ball bearings, nails, metal fragments. The explosion was designed to maximize damage to the wearer while minimizing collateral harm to bystanders. A shaped charge, focused inward. The bomb detonated with approximately 5,000 pounds of force, punching through Wells's sternum and obliterating his chest cavity. But people standing 20 feet away were largely unharmed. Rothstein had calibrated the blast precisely. The anti-tamper mechanisms were equally sophisticated. Any attempt to cut the collar triggered detonation. Any attempt to remove it without the proper keys and combination triggered detonation. Even the correct keys and combination might not have worked. Investigators who disassembled the device after Wells's death discovered the internal mechanism was designed to detonate regardless of external input once the timer reached 0. The scavenger hunt was irrelevant. The keys were irrelevant. The combination was irrelevant. The bomb was going to explode at 3:18 p.m. no matter what Wells did. That level of cruelty requires a specific psychology. Rothstein built a device that offered false hope while guaranteeing death. He crafted instructions that promised survival while ensuring failure. He engineered a trap that looked like a puzzle, a murder dressed as a game. Retired FBI agent Jim Fisher, who worked the case, believed Rothstein was the true mastermind, not Marjorie. Fisher argued that Marjorie was too chaotic, too impulsive, too mentally unstable to plan something this intricate. Her previous crimes were messy, shooting boyfriends in rage, storing bodies in freezers, leaving evidence everywhere. The collar bomb plot required patience, precision, advanced technical knowledge. That was Rothstein's signature. Fisher's theory positioned Marjorie as the motivation and Rothstein as the architect. Marjorie wanted her father dead and needed money to pay for the hit. Rothstein saw an opportunity to create something extraordinary, a crime so bizarre, so complex, so theatrical that it would be remembered forever. The money was secondary. The murder for hire was secondary. The real goal was the crime itself, a puzzle box that killed its solver, a bank robbery that was really an execution, a perfect crime where everyone lost. If Fisher's theory is correct, then Rothstein won. He built the device, orchestrated the conspiracy, and died before facing justice. The cancer killed him less than a year after Wells died. He was 60 years old. He left behind no confession, no remorse, no explanation. His suicide note mentioned Wells only to deny involvement, a psychological gambit to redirect attention. The note worked exactly as intended. It made investigators curious. It connected dots, but Rothstein was already dying when he wrote it. Terminal lymphoma. He had months at most. Turning himself in for hiding Roden's body bought him immunity and public attention. He became a witness instead of a suspect. By the time investigators realized his central role in the collar bomb plot, he was dead. The son of a bitch ended up winning, Fisher told reporters years later. He died with all of the secrets. He got the last laugh. He escaped punishment. He escaped detection. That assessment might be accurate. Rothstein's notebooks, his sketches, his workshop, his carefully maintained alibi all pointed to meticulous planning. He dumped 1,040 pounds of evidence at a landfill 16 days after Wells died. Whatever he disposed of was critical enough to haul to a remote location and bury under garbage. Investigators searched the landfill but found nothing. The evidence was destroyed. Rothstein's role in the 1977 murder case established his pattern. He'd provided a handgun to a friend who used it to kill a romantic rival. When police investigated, Rothstein immediately offered to testify in exchange for immunity. He destroyed the weapon, destroyed evidence, cooperated just enough to avoid prosecution. The strategy worked then. It worked in 2003. He turned in Marjorie for murdering Roden, secured immunity, died before anyone could charge him with the collar bomb crime. The FBI profile of the collar bomber described someone comfortable with shop tools and machinery, someone who took pride in creations with dual purposes, someone with a violent past and a superiority complex. Marjorie fit parts of that profile. Rothstein fit all of it. Together, they were lethal. Separately, they were just broken people hoarding garbage in Erie, Pennsylvania. The collar bomb was William Rothstein's final creation, his legacy. A device that killed one person, destroyed multiple lives, and became one of the most infamous crimes in American history. He built it knowing it would work, knowing Wells would die, knowing investigators would marvel at the craftsmanship even as they condemned the cruelty. In his way, Rothstein was an artist. He just worked in metal and explosives instead of paint and canvas. And his final masterpiece was a bomb that looked like a collar, a murder that looked like a bank robbery, and a perfect crime where the only perfect thing was how completely everyone involved destroyed themselves. The grand jury indictments came down in July 2007, almost 4 years after Brian Wells died. U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan stood before television cameras and microphones and announced the charges. Marjorie Deal Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes were indicted on multiple federal counts: armed bank robbery, conspiracy to commit armed bank robbery, use of a destructive device during a crime of violence. The indictments named William Rothstein and Brian Wells as unindicted co-conspirators, participants in the plot who would not face charges due to death or insufficient evidence. Buchanan described the investigation as one of the most complex the FBI had ever undertaken. More than 1,000 interviews conducted across multiple states, thousands of hours of surveillance footage reviewed, hundreds of pieces of physical evidence analyzed. The conclusion was definitive. Deal Armstrong had masterminded the plot to obtain money for killing her father. Rothstein had built the bomb. Barnes had recruited Wells and participated in the collar's attachment. Stockton had helped restrain Wells at the television tower. Wells had known about the robbery plan, but believed the bomb was fake. All the pieces fit. The case was solved. Except nothing was solved. Not really. The indictments answered some questions while creating new ones. If Wells was a co-conspirator, why did he die? If the plan required his cooperation, why build a bomb that guaranteed his death? If Rothstein was the architect, why did he escape prosecution? If Marjorie was the mastermind, why did the plan fail so spectacularly? Kenneth Barnes pleaded guilty in September 2008 to conspiracy to commit armed bank robbery and aiding and abetting. He accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Deal Armstrong. The sentencing judge gave him 45 years in federal prison. Barnes was 58 years old. A 45-year sentence was effectively life. He'd die in prison regardless. But Barnes cooperated fully with prosecutors. He admitted his role. He detailed the conspiracy. He testified against Marjorie in her trial. For that cooperation, his sentence was later reduced to 22.5 years. He wouldn't walk free, but he might live to see parole. Barnes told the court he regretted his involvement. He said he'd been motivated by greed and stupidity. He said Marjorie had manipulated him, promised him money, convinced him the plan would work. He said he never intended for Brian Wells to die. That part was probably a lie. Barnes knew about the bomb. Barnes helped attach it. Barnes drove away when police arrived, leaving Wells to detonate. Whether he intended Wells's death or simply didn't care became a distinction without a difference. Marjorie Deal Armstrong fought extradition, fought competency evaluations, fought every procedural step of her prosecution. In July 2008, Judge Sean McLaughlin ruled her mentally incompetent to stand trial. She was diagnosed with multiple severe mental disorders, including bipolar disorder, paranoid personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. The court ordered her transferred to a federal mental health facility in Texas for treatment. Prosecutors objected. They argued Marjorie was manipulating the system, faking symptoms, using her documented mental illness as a shield. The judge disagreed. Treatment first, trial later. Marjorie spent 18 months in the Texas facility receiving medication and psychiatric care. In February 2009, Judge McLaughlin scheduled a new competency hearing for March 2010. He wanted updated evaluations. He wanted proof the treatment had worked. On September 9, 2009, after reviewing psychiatric reports, McLaughlin ruled Marjorie competent to stand trial. The case moved forward. Marjorie's trial began in October 2010. She represented herself with assistance from court-appointed counsel. She took the stand in her own defense. For 3 days she testified. She denied involvement in the collar bomb plot. She claimed she'd never heard of Brian Wells until seeing him on the news. She blamed William Rothstein for everything. Rothstein planned it, Rothstein built it, Rothstein executed it. She was innocent, a victim of Rothstein's manipulation and the FBI's incompetence. Prosecutors dismantled her testimony methodically. They presented evidence, placing Marjorie near the bank on August 28, 2003. They presented witnesses who'd heard her discuss the bomb plot in detail months before it happened. They presented her own statements to FBI agents where she'd admitted providing the kitchen timers for the bomb. They presented Kenneth Barnes's testimony describing Marjorie as the mastermind who recruited him, designed the plan, and insisted the bomb be real. Marjorie's defense was that she was being framed. Rothstein had framed her. Barnes had framed her. The FBI had framed her. Everyone was lying except her. She was the smartest person in the courtroom. The jury would recognize her brilliance and acquit her. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. On November 1, 2010, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: armed bank robbery, conspiracy to commit armed bank robbery, use of a destructive device in a crime of violence. Marjorie showed no emotion when the verdicts were read. She'd expected acquittal right up until the moment the jury foreman said guilty. Her superior intelligence had betrayed her again. Judge McLaughlin sentenced Marjorie on February 28, 2011. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. The sentence would run consecutively with the 7 to 20-year state sentence she was already serving for murdering James Roden. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong, former valedictorian, former master's degree holder, former genius, would die in prison. She was 61 years old at sentencing. She appealed. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed her conviction in November 2012. She appealed again. The U.S. Supreme Court denied certiorari in January 2013, refusing to hear her case. She filed a second appeal in 2015. It was denied. She filed motions for compassionate release, claiming her cancer diagnosis warranted mercy. Those motions were denied. The legal system had finished with Marjorie Diehl Armstrong. She died on April 4, 2017, in a federal prison medical facility in Fort Worth, Texas. Breast cancer. She was 68 years old. She'd spent the last 6 years of her life in prison, much of it in isolation, her mental health deteriorating, her body ravaged by cancer. She never expressed remorse for Brian Wells's death. She never admitted guilt. She maintained her innocence until the end, convinced the world had failed to recognize her brilliance. Kenneth Barnes died on June 20, 2019, in federal prison in Butner, North Carolina. Diabetes complications. He was 64 years old. He'd served 11 years of his 22.5-year sentence. His cooperation had bought him reduced time but not freedom. He died locked up, another conspirator who never walked free. Floyd Stockton died in Bellingham, Washington, in January 2023 at age 74 or 75. Acute respiratory failure, ruled accidental. Stockton had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against Diehl Armstrong, but he was never called to testify due to illness. He lived free for nearly 20 years after Wells died. Whether that constituted justice or failure depends on perspective. Harold Diehl outlived his daughter's conviction by 3 years. He died in January 2014 at age 95 of natural causes. His estate, which had motivated the entire conspiracy, was valued at approximately $120,000 at his death, a fraction of the $1.8 million Marjorie had expected. Medical bills and outstanding debts consumed the estate. Marjorie's inheritance was $2,000 according to the will, but after debts were settled, she received nothing. The fortune she'd killed for never existed. The investigation had cost millions of dollars, thousands of man-hours, 4 years of intensive work. It had solved some questions. Marjorie planned it. Rothstein built it. Barnes and Stockton helped execute it. Wells died. But the central mystery remained. Brian Wells's guilt or innocence was never definitively established. The FBI said he was complicit. His family said he was innocent. Jessica Hoopsick said he was a victim. The evidence pointed in multiple directions. The truth died with Wells in a parking lot in Erie, Pennsylvania. In May 2018, Netflix released Evil Genius, the true story of America's most diabolical bank heist, a 4-part documentary series examining the collar bomb case. Directors Barbara Schroeder and Trey Borzilieri interviewed surviving witnesses, reviewed evidence, presented competing theories. The series sparked renewed public interest in a crime most people had forgotten. Online forums debated Wells's innocence. True crime podcasts dissected the evidence. The case became infamous again, 15 years after Brian Wells died. The documentary's most significant contribution was Jessica Hoopsick's confession. Sitting before the camera, visibly aged and worn by years of addiction and poverty, Hoopsick admitted she'd set up Brian Wells. Kenneth Barnes had approached her looking for someone to manipulate. She'd given up Wells for drugs and money. She expressed regret. She called Wells a friend. She said she'd carried the guilt for 15 years. Whether the confession was true or another layer of lies remained ambiguous. ATF agent Jason Wick expressed skepticism about Hoopsick's credibility. But her testimony complicated the FBI's official narrative. If Wells was set up, if he had no advance knowledge, then he was purely a victim. The FBI's conclusion that Wells was a co-conspirator became less certain. The documentary didn't solve the case. It deepened the mystery. It presented Rothstein as a possible mastermind who manipulated everyone, including Marjorie. It showed the fractured intellectuals in all their dysfunction. Brilliant people incapable of functioning in society, hoarding garbage, planning elaborate crimes that destroyed them all. The documentary suggested that perhaps everyone involved was both victim and perpetrator. Marjorie was a victim of mental illness and also a murderer. Barnes was a victim of addiction and also a conspirator. Wells was a victim of circumstance and possibly a willing participant. Rothstein was a victim of his own genius and also the architect of murder. Everyone lost. No one won. The collar bomb killed Wells and then killed everyone who built it, just more slowly. The FBI's assessment remains one of the most complicated and bizarre crimes in the annals of the Bureau. The complexity came not from sophisticated execution, but from the sheer psychological dysfunction of everyone involved. Normal criminals rob banks for money. They plan escapes. They try not to get caught. The collar bomb conspirators built a device guaranteed to bring maximum law enforcement attention. They created a scavenger hunt impossible to complete. They killed their own accomplice. They left evidence everywhere. They talked about the crime to multiple people before and after. They were geniuses who acted like idiots, or idiots who thought they were geniuses. The case's legacy extends beyond the crime itself. It demonstrated how mental illness and intelligence can combine catastrophically. Marjorie Deal Armstrong had a verified genius-level IQ and multiple severe personality disorders. That combination didn't make her clever. It made her dangerous and self-destructive. Rothstein was brilliant mechanically and emotionally empty. Barnes was smart enough to know better and desperate enough not to care. Wells, if he was complicit, was simple enough to believe lies from people who'd proven themselves untrustworthy. The collar bomb case exposed a subculture of marginal people living in a declining Rust Belt city, invisible until they committed a crime spectacular enough to force visibility. Erie, Pennsylvania wasn't for anything particularly noteworthy before August 28, 2003. Now it's known for the pizza bomber. A dubious legacy. The city's name became synonymous with one of America's strangest crimes. The physical evidence was destroyed or sealed. Brian Wells's body was buried after autopsy. The collar bomb was disassembled and analyzed, then placed in secure storage. The Geo Metro was eventually auctioned. Rothstein's house on Peach Street changed ownership multiple times. Mamma Mia's Pizzeria closed years later, unrelated to the crime, but forever associated with it. The television transmission tower still stands at 8631 Peach Street. The coordinates where Wells was ambushed remain unmarked. No plaque. No memorial, just trees and dirt and the ghost of a man who delivered pizzas there and never came back. The case occasionally resurfaces in true crime media. Podcasts retell the story. YouTube documentaries analyze the evidence. Internet sleuths debate theories. The footage of Wells dying has been removed from most websites, but persists in archived corners of the internet. His final moments, broadcast live on local television, became one of the earliest examples of death as spectacle in the digital age. People watched a man die in real time. The bomb squad arrived 2 minutes too late. That timing haunts everyone who worked the case. 2 minutes. If traffic had been lighter, if the call had come sooner, if the officers had acted faster, Brian Wells might have lived. The bomb squad might have removed the collar. Wells might have testified. The case might have been solved definitively. Or maybe not. Maybe the bomb would have detonated anyway when tampering was detected. Maybe Wells would have died regardless. Maybe those 2 minutes were always meaningless. Just another false hope in a crime built on false hopes. The central question persists. Did Brian Wells know he was going to die? Did he understand, in those final 30 minutes handcuffed on the pavement, that his co-conspirators had betrayed him? Or did he die believing he'd been randomly victimized, grabbed by strangers, forced into a nightmare? The answer matters for how we judge Wells. Co-conspirator killed by his own greed, or innocent man murdered for convenience. His family believes innocence. The FBI concluded guilt. Jessica Hoopsick says victim. Kenneth Barnes says co-conspirator. Everyone with knowledge has motivation to lie. The only person who could answer definitively is dead with a fist-sized hole in his chest. 15 years separated Wells's death from the Netflix documentary. 15 years of speculation, investigation, trials, appeals, documentations. 15 years, and the case remains fundamentally unresolved. The crime was solved in the sense that conspirators were identified and convicted. But the truth of what happened, the truth of who Brian Wells really was, remains sealed in a bomb collar that detonated at 3:18 p.m. on August 28, 2003. The collar bomb was designed to kill its wearer. It succeeded, but it also killed everyone who built it. Marjorie died in prison. Barnes died in prison. Rothstein died of cancer. Stockton died of respiratory failure. Harold Deal died having disowned his daughter. James Roden died shot in his sleep. Robert Thomas died shot on a couch. Multiple other men in Marjorie's life died under suspicious circumstances. The body count surrounding this conspiracy reaches double digits if you include peripheral victims and suspicious deaths. A crime designed to steal $250,000 to fund a murder for hire to obtain a $1.8 million inheritance netted $8,702, killed one person immediately, imprisoned several others for life, and ultimately produced $0 for anyone. The inheritance Marjorie killed for didn't exist. Her father had given the money away. The perfect crime became the perfect failure. Perhaps that's the real story. Not a complex conspiracy, but a simple tragedy. Broken people in a broken city trying to do impossible things for meaningless reasons. Intelligence without wisdom, cunning without foresight, greed without satisfaction. A bomb that killed everyone it touched, whether they wore it or built it. Brian Wells delivered pizzas for 10 years without incident. On his final delivery, he drove to a television tower at the end of a dirt road. What happened in those woods transformed him from invisible to infamous. From pizza man to collar bomb victim. From nobody to somebody. Everyone remembers for the worst possible reason. They told him it was fake. Someone is always lying in Erie, Pennsylvania. The bomb was real. The bomb was always real. And everyone who touched it died.